In this video, I'm going to introduce a 5-step method to help you learn vocabulary efficiently and put that vocabulary into your long-term memory. Coming up. This is a 5-step method that I've adapted from the famous academic and language teacher Scott Thornbury. What I'll do is I'll put a link to his article in the description below this video. It works on the basis of 5 principles of learning, and throughout this video I'll describe them in a bit more detail. Now remember, this video does come with a free PDF which outlines the 5 steps and is something that you can keep with you when you're learning new vocabulary. Again, the link will be in the description below this video. Now, to start this process, you're going to need 5 to 10 words that you want to learn. So I'm going to be using these 5 words: solitude, epiphany, rhythm, eternity, and abundance. And I've chosen them simply because I think they're nice words in English. But you would have 5 to 10 words that you want to learn. Now, the first thing we're going to do is to answer questions about these words. Question number 1. Which of these words has the most syllables? So, solitude, 3, epiphany, 4, rhythm, 1, eternity, 4, abundance, 3. So epiphany and eternity have the most syllables. Now you would answer this question for your 5 to 10 words. And then we move on to question number 2. Can you think of a word that rhymes with each word? So solitude, attitude, epiphany, symphony, rhythm, revision, eternity, fraternity, abundance, attendance. Okay, and again, you would look at your 5 to 10 words and think of words that rhyme with them. And then we move on to question number 3. Which part of speech are these words? So part of speech means adjective, noun, adverb, verb. In this case, we have solitude, noun, epiphany, noun, rhythm, noun, eternity, noun, and abundance, noun. So they're all nouns, but you might have adverbs or adjectives or verbs that you're trying to learn. Now, you don't need to write down the answer to these questions, although it probably would help for your ability to remember them. But it's not necessary. Question number 4. Can you think of collocations for these words? So collocations are words that go together. So for example, we could say life of solitude. That's a collocation. Sudden epiphany. Again, 2 words that often go together. Sense of rhythm. All eternity. In abundance. So for example, at the wedding there was food in abundance. So these are collocations, and you would think of collocations for the words that you want to learn. And then finally we have a 5th question. Can you think of a synonym for each word? So a synonym is another word or phrase that means the same thing as these words. So instead of solitude, we can say alone, epiphany, realization, rhythm, flow, eternity, forever, and abundance, plenty. Again, you need to think of synonyms for your words, and you can either write them down or just think about them. Okay, so now that we've answered these 5 questions, I'm going to explain a little bit more about why this is a good idea. When you're answering these questions about the words you want to learn, you're changing from passive learning to active learning. Simply by answering these questions, you're having to think about the words, and that increases your chances of learning them. So this works on the principle of cognitive depth. And again, you can find out more about this by looking at Scott Thornbury's article, V is for Vocabulary Teaching. And again, I'll put a link in the description below. But we're going to move on to step 2 of the process, and that is retrieval, or remembering. So what you would do is take your pen or pencil and a piece of paper and just write down, without looking, the words that you're trying to learn. So we had, for example, solitude, we had epiphany, we had rhythm, eternity, and abundance. So just by retrieving or remembering these words, we're more likely to be able to remember them when we need them in the future. So that works on the principle of retrieval. Let's move on to stage number 3, and that is to personalize the vocabulary. So what you can do is to think of an image for each word. So for example, solitude. I could think of somebody alone on a beach, and I'm just going to put that image in my mind. For epiphany, well, I could think of somebody with a light bulb above their head, and that's kind of signifying that they've had a sudden realization, or they've suddenly had an idea. Rhythm, well, we could have somebody playing the drums. Eternity, well, I'll have a hamster running on a hamster wheel. It's forever turning. It's going on for eternity. And abundance, well, for me, I think of a photo of Michael Phelps and his diet, because he eats so much food. He eats an abundance of food. So just by coming up with an image in our head of all of these words, we're more likely to remember them. But there are other things that we can do to personalize the vocabulary. Think about where you learned each word, or why you decided to learn each word. So where did you learn it? Was it in a language academy? Did you learn this word in a newspaper or in a book you were reading? Or did you hear it in a series? And then why did you decide to learn this word? Is it a useful word in the future? Is it a word that you always need but never knew? Okay, and then we're going to move on to the third, which is to think about personal stories or experiences connected to each word. So for example, solitude. For me, it reminds me of when I was rock climbing alone in the French Alps. And I felt a sense of solitude. I was alone up there and it was nobody around. So just that kind of image and that story helps me to connect this word and the idea and the meaning of this word. Okay, so this works on the principle of learning of association and links. So when we make these kind of associations, particularly personal associations, we're more likely to learn the vocabulary. Let's move on to step 4, and that is to contextualize the vocabulary. Quite simply, we can just write a sentence for each one. So, I love the solitude of the mountains. He had the epiphany when he least expected it. Rhythm. Despite the classes and hours of practice, he still had no rhythm. Quite a sad sentence. Eternity. For the 2 weeks waiting for the exam results felt like an eternity. And abundance. There was an abundance of food at the wedding. Okay, so it's a good idea to write down these sentences, and that's something that you can look at again when you're revising these words. And when you're writing them down, you're providing a context for the vocabulary that you're learning, which is how we learn. Another good tip is whenever you hear or see the word that you're learning, just think to yourself, that's the word that I'm learning. And by doing that, you're going to become more familiar with the appropriate context for that word. Okay, the final stage of this 5-step process is to review the vocabulary. And this is very important. But it's also important how we review the vocabulary. Look at this diagram. This is called Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve and review cycle. And we can see that when we first learn information, well, we retain 100% of that information. We completely know and remember it. However, after one day, so after 24 hours, we typically only have 80% remembered. So we forget 20%. It's at that stage that you need to revise the vocabulary. And that takes it back up to 100%. Now again, over time, you're going to forget that vocabulary, but at a slightly different rate. It's going to take you longer to forget that vocabulary, which means you don't need to revise the vocabulary on the second day, but you should revise the vocabulary on the third day. And you can see that here. And that takes it back up to 100%. Now again, over time you're going to forget, but this time even more time. It will take even more time before you begin to forget it. So that means that we need to space out the time that we revise that vocabulary. You can find out more about this by looking at Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve and review cycle. But it's also important about how we revise the vocabulary. So I suggest simply translating the words into your first language. Read the sentences that we did in stage 4, so the stage before this, or if you want, just do this 5-stage process again, and then you're much more likely to remember the vocabulary and it will stay in your long-term memory for longer. Okay, I hope this has helped you, and I look forward to hearing your experiences with this 5-step process. Remember, there is a PDF outlining this 5 steps in the link below this video, and I suggest that's something that you keep with you when you're learning English, or any other language for that matter. Best of luck with your studies, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye then.